giving you useful and practical tips to help you make more money selling travel. This is the Art of Selling Travel Podcast, and here to guide you through it all, your host, Glenda Beagle.
Well, I am so excited for today's guest. We have Steph Lee from Host Agency Reviews. And as I was telling her just before we went online here, I've seen it popping up in the sphere, in the travel world for the last number of years. So I'm so excited to have you join me, Steph. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Glenda. It's a pleasure to be on.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. Now, this is going to be part of a series. We've got quite a few different episodes that are going to be geared towards those that are newer to the travel industry, because one, in a post-COVID world, there's so many people brand new to the industry coming in. And, when you read the stats and everything else, I can't remember if it was Travel Weekly or Asked, I was just listening to them. They're predicting a massive influx and a bigger need for more travel advisors. So there's so many things that they don't know when they come in. And I find that host agencies is kind of some of the biggest questions in the where do I start factor.
Yes, I would 100% agree with that. Usually, we're called Host Agency Reviews, and I do believe that for probably 98% of the people that write into us or visit the site, that a host agency is the best route to go in when you have no experience, you have no idea what you're doing. They're a partner that can help kind of bridge that gap for you and show you the industry, because you don't have that where you can sit alongside someone in an office and learn what's going on. So the host agency is going to provide that community, and they're going to provide that education, but it is challenging. Like when you come in, I think one of the challenges for a lot of people is you're not just learning the travel industry and how that works. For most of the people, they're also learning how to become an entrepreneur, which is like 17 other jobs on top of not just trying to learn the travel industry, but learning how to do sales. It's a huge deal.
Absolutely. And I love that you say that too, because this is where so many are switching out of their employee roles in whatever career they had prior. I know that I see a lot, just in talking to different travel advisors, we see a lot of nurses, a lot of teachers, a lot of first responders that transfer over to travel kind of as that second career. Or even just simply, the one actually that surprises me a lot is I see a lot of accountants come over.
Yes. Yeah, which actually isn't that surprising when you think about it, because they love to put the pieces together and organize things and then hand them off to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's seeing how going from that total employee mindset over into the employer or the entrepreneur stage. And it's a complete shift. I know a question I've gotten a lot of times is, well, how do I get a consistent income? Well, I always say, go back and get a job.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to know on the second Friday of every month, you're going to get a paycheck. You need a job. This is entrepreneurship, and it can pay dividends, but it's not necessarily consistent. You will get back what you put in when the efforts are the right ways and things like that. So if somebody's brand new and they're trying to figure out, how do I pick a host? Obviously, that's where Host Agency Reviews comes in then. How is it that you guys are able to help brand new travel advisors choose a host?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Before I do too, just to touch on the topic you talked about earlier with the huge rush of post-COVID new entrants, like the site I always like to think of as kind of the bellwether for where things are going, because we're the only place in the industry where you're meeting people before they come into the funnel. They're at the very, very top of the funnel and going down. So we're their first contact point when they're exploring a career in travel. And so you can look at the traffic on the site and get a feel if there's growth and the site's been around since 2012, and every year there's been growth, with the exception, of course, COVID. But even the second year of COVID, we had record numbers on the site. And then this January was insane. It was 60% up from the year prior, which had been our best year on record. Not by much, but it was our best year on record.
Yeah.
And so we are definitely seeing that here. But in terms of with people looking for a host agency and kind of coming into that, some of the resources we have that are available is one, we have our directory on the site, which is like your Yelp or your Yellow Pages, where you can find all the different host agencies. You can search by a ton of different filters. A lot of people in the beginning, it's really overwhelming because you don't know who the consortia are. So you can't say, oh, I'd really like to be with a travel leaders agency or a signature agency. So you're probably not going to use those filters in the beginning, but you can use things like, I think I'd like to be with a smaller, more boutique host agency. I know that with that, there comes some things that the larger host agencies have, but on the flip side, they offer things that the larger agencies don't. So there's filters like that. So you can use the directory as one great thing. We also have a course we just launched on starting your travel agency. And that is our blog portion of the site has all these different articles that we've written over 12 years. And they're really great, except for it's like sending someone into a room where you're working on a book and you've thrown the pages everywhere. And you're like, the information is in there, go get it. And you give them nothing to work off of, so they're kind of at their own. But the course it's an online course, it's videos, everything's in order, and it walks you through and actually gives you the map to do it. So that's another great way for advisors. And then we have our free 7-day setup, which is kind of like the light version of our course that it might be a little bit more of an organized room. But it's, there's not a lot of support in going through everything.
That's awesome. It's funny when you're telling that story, I instantly flash back to childhood. I remember being in kindergarten, elementary, and being told there's the library, go pick a book.
Oh,
and not knowing where to start. So when you say it's a little bit more organized chaos, I'm like, oh, they put the librarian in with you.
Yes, the librarian is in with you. We're helping you. And we've even got a card catalog.
I was going to say I am back from the days of the card catalog, but I'm like, I don't know how many out there, still remember that sort of thing.
Well, they should, because they were really nifty.
Right? That's awesome. So now I'm Canadian based. Is host agency reviews just American, or do you also have Canadian host agencies?
Yeah, we have Canadian host agencies on there. So you can search. One of the main filters is if they accept agents just in the US or in Canada as well. And when the number that accept Canadian agents is much, much smaller. So there's just a handful of them. And part of that is the regulations in Canada are a lot stricter than in the US. And it also, just so Canadian listeners understand as well, the power of a host agency, besides the community they're bringing and the education and the relationships, is their sales. And the suppliers that you use in Canada, while there is some crossover, they're different than what you have in the US. So one of the big reasons you'll want to go with a host is because you're going to be getting those higher commissions. It can be 5, 6, 7% more than you'd get on your own. But if you're a US host agency and you have your preferred suppliers that you book and you bring a Canadian advisor on, if you're booking Sunwing or some of the other vacation packages up there, your host agency likely will not be at the top tier for that because they don't have very many Canadian advisors. So that's something to think about if you're a Canadian advisor and you choose to go with the US host. Ask kind of with the suppliers that you would be booking what the commission levels are at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing too, because I know that I've encountered this over the years, people saying, well, do I really need a host? And actually, as crazy as it sounds, or do I even need a consortia? I remember years ago being at one product supplier event, and I was chatting with an independent agency and they had their own team and everything else. She goes, oh, I don't plan to give any money to consortia. And I said, but that's how you're going to get your better commission rates. Because like you were saying earlier, whether it's travel leaders, ensemble, travel safe, there's so many different ones out there. And if you're newer to the industry, don't pay attention to the names, just know that there's different reasons why people do different things. But it gives the agency itself more commission, much less the independent agents below and things like that. So I do see it sometimes in the different chat groups. Oh, I don't need any of those. But I'm going to tell you, unless you are somebody who's producing multiple 7 figures in sales on day one, which probably is not anybody's reality, you're going to want to be partnered up with somebody in order to access those better commission rates. But also too, you want, and that was part of what you were saying earlier too, is you want to make sure it's somebody who has the suppliers that you want to work with. And you might not necessarily know exactly which suppliers you want to work with right out of the gate. So I'm also my suggestion would be to slow down picking your host agency. That's one of those things that take the moment, take a breath, like just take a pause, because that can be a very big part of the success of your business. So we'll maybe circle back to that one. But the other thing is that if something goes wrong, not that we want to say it will or anything else, but let's be honest, things can go sideways when booking travel for your clients, missed flights, cancellation, whatever it is. If your agency doesn't already have a pre-existing relationship with the supplier, it makes it so much harder for you to be able to have a conversation with a sales rep or somebody like that. Because if there's not an existing relationship, there's not existing sales in place of a certain level, you get moved to what they call their inside sales, which is just somebody in a call center. So if you're wanting to work with specific suppliers and other such, you want to make sure your host agency or even your consortia is very much aligned with that supplier, so that you have access to a business development manager who's going to be able to help step in the event something goes wrong. But also, if you're wanting to build out an amazing group and you've got this special offer that you want to create, you want to have that relationship so that you're able to access possibly doing a consumer event or things like that. And I know we've kind of like taken us from like 101 to like to university level.
We're getting our PhD now.
But the thing is that there's going to be so many places along the way where this is going to impact your business. And so that's why I really do say it's important to kind of take a pause and not just go with the one down the street or the one that you've heard of or things like that. I've also seen people who they love Disney. So they're like, oh, well, I'll join a Disney agency. But then they get in and they're like, oh, I actually don't want to sell just Disney, but that's all that host does. So it's making sure that you know what you want to do. And sometimes right out of the gate, because you're going to hear people talk about pick your niche, do this. And I am a big believer in niche. And I am Canadian. That's why I say niche, not niche.
I say niche too. It must be because I'm Minnesotan and too close to the border.
That would do. Yeah, that's Canadian light.
I know I picked up on your O's. I was like, oh, we're going to be so cute together with our long O's.
But the thing is, though, is that you want to make sure that you're kind of testing it out a little bit to kind of see where you fit. But also know what you pick on day one does not have to be what you end your business on. For some people, it is. They get into it because they are just river cruise is their thing. Or they get into it knowing that cruise is never going to be their thing. And that's okay. But it's also okay that once you get in there and say, you know what, I actually really enjoy this. I would like to evolve my business. I'm not going to say switch, but evolve it. But you want to make sure that you have those options through your host. What would you say are some of the biggest questions? Because I do know you hold your live events and other such in January and things like that. What are some of like the biggest, most commonly asked questions that you hear?
One of the big ones is kind of charging fees in the seller of travel laws. That's a really big one. And so for those that aren't familiar, so within the United States, there's 4 states that have seller of travel registration. So essentially what the seller of travel registration is, somebody has to register their business with that state so that when they're selling to clients of that state, residents of that state, or if your agency is located in that state, so that if something goes wrong and you, for some reason, are stealing money or something along those lines, they can contact you. And the money for those registrations, like in California, it goes into, there's another thing, I think it's like the CRF, like the restitution fund, consumer restitution fund, that goes to pay back anyone that like an agency has gone bankrupt and they ran out of money. So with those seller of travel licenses, like one of the questions is, because with that, like I said, they're to kind of protect the consumers. And one of the rules for the seller of travel registration is that the money needs to go. So if your client is paying you, that money needs to go to whoever is the seller of travel registrant, which before host agency wasn't a big deal because it would just be a travel agency. But now with host agencies, we've got another layer because now you're the IC and you have your own independent business. When money comes in through you, you are not usually, because often you can use your host agency seller of travel number. You are not able to take that money then because you're not the SOT holder. So it goes through your host agency. So for when you're paying a supplier, that's not a big deal because it goes through the supplier and that's fine. But when you're taking fees, that's where things get confusing. So I'll say that California and Florida are the two states that enforce it, that have the most, I would say, structured laws and actually police it. And so what I've seen through, I would say, and I'm not sure, Glenda, if you've seen this, but maybe like the past 8 years in the industry, before that, people always put the money through the host agency. So if someone pays you via check, that check has to be made out to your host agency. But then people started saying, well, if I'm charging, as consultation fees became more popular within the industry, they're like, well, that's a consultation fee. It's not paying for travel. So my client can pay me directly. And does that make it so I can avert the seller of travel rules and not have to, because the reason advisors are doing that, I should say, is usually there's a commission split with a host agency and they don't want to, like, if you're on a 70-30 split, so you get 70%, if you're getting $100 consultation fee, you don't want to pay $30 to your host agency. So this is where it came out of. So people were like, well, it's a consultation fee. But then I really looked into the laws, like reading all the actual legislation on it, and then spoke to like 3 different attorneys within the industry and said, listen, this is the situation. Is this legally, are what advisors doing actually legal? And 2 of the 3 were like, no, definitely not. I would not do that. And the third one was like, well, in California, it's a little bit like gray, maybe, and it hasn't been tested in the courts, but in Florida, definitely not. So I would say that's like one of the big questions is the seller of travel registration, and can they accept money with their service fees, et cetera, and their consultation fees. And I would say, no, it should go through the host agency if you want to be really, really on par with what you should be doing and not have the IRS or whoever come after you.
Okay, so there's so much to unpack there. So first off, thank you so much, because I actually get that question in my DMs, and I do say, I'm not American, and there's only so much room in my brain for policies. And of course, policies are dry as stink to read. So I love the way you just distilled that, because that made sense to me. Because the other thing is they said, well, I'm not allowed to collect fees because I live in Florida. And I'm like, but I have other clients who live in Florida and I know they're getting fees. So how are they doing it? And things like that. So I said, go back, double check with your host. So this makes a lot of sense, because the one in particular said my host doesn't charge fees. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. That's how it is. So if you've been around my podcast any length of time at all, you've been in any of my trainings, we've had a conversation over a drink, that I am a huge proponent of charging fees. So I would think that that's got to be one of those questions when you are trying to figure out how to choose your host, is whether or not your host is fee positive or fee negative. Because, and if you've listened any length of time, you've probably heard me say this before, you are paid, or you work for whoever pays you. So if you are not charging fees, you are only working for the supplier. And if you are only working for the supplier, are you actually doing what's in the best interest of your client? Because I've seen this in so many chat groups. Oh, goodness, I need to find a different tour because this one's not paying commission, or this one's not paying enough commission. But the tour needs to be just like this because this tour is perfect for my client. Well, in that case, you're not working for the client, you're working for the supplier who's going to pay you the best, which means you're working for yourself. if I was your client, I wouldn't want you as my advisor because I want you to choose what's in my best interest as the client, not what's in your best interest. And when you are truly putting me, your client, first, I'll pay extra for that because I know that you're putting me first. And instead, when you are doing everything based on who's going to pay you the best commission, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, I know that you're not putting me, your client, first. And that to me is a deal breaker. And when you hear of people talk about, oh, sales, oh, who wants to, oh, sales are gross. When you only work for the supplier, you develop commission breath, which means people can smell it coming and it will completely change the way people respond to you. And, I've also heard too, in terms of fees, oh my goodness, but, now I'm going to be more than the internet. Well, good. You're better than the internet. You should be more than the internet. There's no prize for being the second cheapest. So don't try to be the cheapest because first off, those people are not loyal to you. They're loyal to price tags. You want to make sure that people are loyal to you, your service, and what it is that you provide for them. And when people are loyal, they're willing to pay more because they have a better understanding of what it is you're bringing to the table. So I love the way that you explained that sellers of travel, because now that makes a lot more sense as to the issues why. Because like I said, somebody's like, no, I'm forbidden to charge fees. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right. But I, in my Google sphere, couldn't quite figure out what she was saying, but this makes sense.
And the other thing too, really quickly, is to check in your host agency contract as well, because some host will very strictly say in there, you are not allowed to charge fees on your own. Or if you do, they have to come through the host agency, which typically with that independent contractor relationship, they're not supposed to tell you to do anything. But because that's a law, I mean, that's the same as saying you're not going to steal something. So that would be okay to say.
Yeah. But if your host agency says you cannot charge fees, full stop, not even through us, you need to ask if that's the right host agency.
Mm-hmm.
Because they right there have limited what your potential earning is. And they have decided what you are worth, and it's only worth what the suppliers are willing to pay. And I've said it from the moment COVID started right on through. There's going to be a time as we come out of this, some of the suppliers are going to continue to cut their commissions. And up here in Canada, we actually have one that they've gone really heavy into performance based and they started cutting down the commissions. Now they've kind of started bumping them back up again because it affected their sales. But I've been in the industry almost 20 years. I've seen where we got paid big commissions on things and now we get zero on it. So there is a time where this could happen. And if you decide at that point you're going to suddenly charge fees, well, you're in a whole different world. So just do it now and just, know that they're a part of the process. Mm-hmm. If we buy a car, I don't know if it's like that down there, but if you buy a car up here, we have something, what is it called? Dock fees. It's like $495 when you've just bought a whatever $1,000 vehicle. They charge you $495 for processing the documents.
Oh, I'm sure they have something like
right?
That. Yeah.
I'm like, but we just spent however many thousands, tens of
just
thousands.
Wrap it in. Just wrap it into that cost next time.
Yeah. And up here in Canada, I love it too. And they're like, and it'll be this much extra for a block heater. I'm like, what vehicle in Canada works without a block heater?
Another good question.
So, yeah. So just, own it, charge it. Everybody's charging fees. If you start looking around, if you look on VRBO, or I think they're now calling themselves Verbo or Airbnb, things like that, they have Airbnb especially. It's like 10% of your entire rental gets added at the end so that they can run their website.
Mm-hmm.
And
one of the things too, if you're nervous about charging fees or don't have the confidence, because sometimes for me, if you're plopped into something and you're not feeling confident about it, like data can really help me feel a lot more confident about things. So every year we do our annual survey, and it's actually going on through June 4th, and it'll close June 5th. But definitely fill that out if you haven't already. It's at hostagencyreviews.com survey, because at the end of it, every year we publish a report, and we'll do one for hosted advisors specifically and ones that are independently accredited. And if we have enough people that are employees fill it out, we also do an employee report. But we also talk very specifically about fees and we ask questions. So if you take the survey, you get these like 55-page reports for free, which would normally cost like $90. And so with that, like last year, I think was the first year, it was like 49%. So it wasn't quite 50, but 49% of hosted advisors charge some sort of fee, and over 50% of independent advisors did. And then we like break it down into consultation fees, service fees. And then like, if you're doing a consultation fee, do you do it hourly or do you do it by hour? How much do you do? Does it vary? And we give you all this data so you can be like, all right, the most common consultation fee is this amount, and they do it by like one flat rate. And you can be like, oh, service fee for airline tickets is X amount, or service fees for cruises is X amount. So it for anyone that's uncomfortable, that's a great way to kind of boost your confidence and be like, this is kind of what the going rate is in the industry.
I love that. That data would be absolutely fantastic for so many. The other thing, and I know we've kind of chased down a service fee trail. Like I said, I am so pro fee. But, you know, because I hear from people, because of course, what's the first question they do? They go into a Facebook group filled with travel advisors and say, how much do you charge?
Mm-hmm.
And you will get everything from never charged, day in my life, never planned to, up to $2,500 or $5,000. You know, it can be absolutely anywhere. So where do you start?
Yeah.
If you've never charged a fee before, charge $5 per person. Like, pick something and start, and then just keep going. You know, you don't have to come out of the gate at $500. Pick something that you're okay. Just know what that amount is and start. And so whether it's $5 or $50 or whatever it is per person, start somewhere and go. Years ago, when I was working for somebody else before I had my own agency, we started at $20 a passenger. And we just did that on everything. And then it upped and upped. And then when I went over to my own agency, I kept going up from there. And that's just where you start. And you will know when you've hit kind of your tipping point. And then you're going to ride it there for a while. And then you're going to start to climb again. And that's just how you do it. So,
And one of the other things I tell advisors, you know, charging a fee is a personal thing. You know, I had somebody that did like very high-end luxury, and she had said like, you know, if someone's like booking a $100,000 trip with me, I'm not going to charge them a consultation fee. So, you know, there's different circumstances. And so you can always waive that. But the one thing, like for me personally, as a business owner, the one thing that, so I'll do consulting. I don't want to say I don't enjoy consulting, but I enjoy consulting. It's not something I would want to do all the time. So I want to make it worth my while so that when I'm talking with the person, I'm not feeling like, I hate this. I don't want to be doing this. I should be doing something else right now. So one thing to think about on your end, and that I always do, is like, what makes it worthwhile for me, that like, if a client ends up leaving after you've given them a quote, that you're like, whatever, like I was paid for my time. That's totally fine. So that there's not any harsh feelings, because I that can really burn people out. So I always am like, what price would make it so that you're not going to get burnt out?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because that takes on a whole nother emotions level, you know? And I think especially, which, you know, if we were to bring her back around to getting started, when you get started in the travel industry, it's all excitement, because here you are, like, who doesn't want to travel and explore the world and do all these things? And when, okay, let's just be clear here. When you reach out to a host agency, you are not talking to another advisor. You are not talking to another. You are talking to their sales team. So always understand you are talking to a professional salesperson whose sole job is to grow the agency. So everything's going to be sunshine and roses, just so that we're fully aware of that. And so that's why we want to really equip you with the knowledge of the other sorts of questions you need to ask so that you can kind of get past all of the excitement and the flutters and this, that, the other. But there is, whether you are an entrepreneur in any industry, there is stress. There is a big ride of emotions. There's all different sorts of things that go on. And so we want to make sure that when you're working with a client, especially, you're not going to have those emotions after, because if you get ghosted, if you do all this work, and like you said, you do the consultation, you put together the whole proposal, and then you see them on Facebook 6 months later, living out the itinerary you just did, but you didn't get to book it for them. It creates a lot of hard feelings and resentments and things like that, which can cause some issues.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that that's not what we're doing. And so, yeah, I fully agree too, that when you charge that fee to put this all together, especially the highly customized, if it's just a flop and drop in the sun, not necessarily a big deal. But if you've built out like a 3-4 week customized itinerary to Europe, and you've put in hours and hours and hours to do this, and you didn't set it up to get compensated in any way if they take it and go somewhere else, that's a big emotion to get past. And especially when you're brand new in the industry, or, maybe not even brand new, you're not hitting the sales goals you want to hit just yet. And you put in all this work and you're so excited because this is going to be such a good one. Like, just, it really is, like, the resentment can be quite hard. And the problem is a lot of people, and I'm going to say salespeople as a whole, no matter what industry you're in, whether you're real estate, travel advisor, whatever, that resentment you have for that client doesn't stay there. You will start to take a little piece of it to the next client and the next client and the next client.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my first client that I charged a giant service fee to. She had come in, and I know you should never prejudge people, but I knew what her job was, which was a minimum wage job. And she came in and she wanted a month-long or 6-week trip to Africa. She wanted first-class seats. She wanted private tours. Yeah, like, I see your eyes getting big. You're like, you're right.
She's much bigger dreamer than I was when I was making minimum wage.
Right? And so I said to her, she's like, okay, so you'll get me a quote for that. And I was like, oh, for flip's sakes. Like, do you have any idea how long this is going to take? Like, it was all private tours. She didn't want to do group tours. Like, so I'm like, well, how about this group tour? And she's like, no, I want to do it all on my own. And I want to do this and I want to do that. And I'm like, good freaking grief. So I said to her, well, that's going to be this was a few years ago. So I'm like, that's probably like $30,000 plus the cost of your flight. Okay. And I'm like, I know she said it with a lot of confidence, but still not buying it. So I said to her, okay, just so you know, I charge, and I can't remember. I want to say it was either $1,000 or $2,000 fee to plan it. And this would have been like, this was back before I switched my office location. So like 2013, 2014. So like, we're talking 10 years ago. Heavens, it's 10 years ago. But I said to her, I want to say it was probably like a $2,000 service fee. Like, I picked an astronomical number to plan it. And she's like, okay, was there GST? So was there tax on top of that? I'm like, yes, there was. She's like, okay, credit card work? I'm like, yep. So we swiped the credit card. We were like, and she's like, okay, and how long will it take until I get my quote back? Like, give me 2 weeks. She's like, oh, that quick already? Okay. Guess what? She booked it.
Wow.
But going into it, I'm like, because even as I'm going through that process, I'm like, I still don't think she's going to do this.
Yeah.
But I made $2,000 just to do this. I'm good. And then she booked it. I was like, holy smokes. Because even when I called the companies, they're like, well, is she aware what this is going to cost? I said, I told her 30,000. And they're like, yeah, we can probably do that. And just the way we did things, like, she didn't necessarily want over the top, but she wanted private and she wanted very specific things. And yeah, no, we did it. She booked it, never batted an eye at it. And when I was chatting with her, she just said, she goes, I was going to retire, but I just lost somebody in my family. She was young. She wasn't old, like wasn't full retirement age. She just said, she goes, I'll work a few more years than I'd planned on. She goes, but this is something I've always wanted to do. And this family member never got to do it. So why am I going to wait? She goes, I would rather travel now and work later rather than work now and travel later. She goes, because if the future ain't promised, I'm not going to promise it to work.
Yeah.
She goes, I'd rather not live a world where I promise all my time to work and not promise it to travel. And I was like, oh my goodness. So like, that one was one of those big ones to me that you can't judge, because I see that a lot. Travel advisors are like, oh no, there's no way. So they'll just not do it. When you've got those consultation fees or other such in place, you are going to weed out some of the ones that are just tire kickers and other such. But it's also going to get you set up, which is why you got to make sure your host lets you charge fees.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things too, if someone again is feeling a little bit nervous about charging these fees, like a really popular route, and I can't remember the exact number, it's in the report, but a huge percentage of people that charge these consultation fees, or service fee or consultation fees specifically, but they do it kind of on the plan to go model. So it's essentially like a deposit. Like if the person ends up going, they'll apply some or a portion or all of that consultation fee to the trip. So that way there's no real risk on your end that you're not going to get compensated at all. So that's another thing you can consider. But Glenda, like the same thing, I grew up in rural Minnesota, and with my parents' agency, when they had the storefront, there was a lot of farmers out there that had sold their land and were millionaires, but you would never guess it. And they would come in looking, after a hard day's work, looking not like they were millionaires. And, they would drop tens of thousands of dollars on a trip. And so, I mean, I think it's a great life lesson in general, not to judge people by what you see, but especially as a business person.
Yeah. And that's just it. I remember one of my best clients, now, of course, little hope and a prayer, still living in a small town. He wanted to pay by check, and nobody would let him pay by check. And I'm like, you're traveling far enough off. If it bounces, I cancel your trip. We're good. So I would do it. And he's like, okay, so then this is what I want. And what he would pick again was $30,000 trips. And he was a rigger. So he worked oil rigs, things like that. So he came in, he usually had grease on his clothes, this, that, the other. My entire business, if you will, I was a country girl myself, was farmers and oil. And guess what? There's some good money in that. But people judge them. And I can't stress it enough. When you are in sales, you cannot judge the people in front of you, the people who call you. I think one of my best sales techniques, and you would get this being from Minnesota, is when they would call and I can hear the combine in the background. I'd ask them how it's running. And they would tell me how many bushels an acre they're pulling. And to be honest, yes, I grew up on the farm. My dad was doing the same thing, this, that, the other. I had a general idea, but it just didn't really stick. And I'd be like, oh, so that's running pretty good, right? Or it sounds like it's running good. And he's like, yeah, good. So, because I also knew it was running good if they were calling from the combine to book their trip.
Yeah, that's true.
It was always pretty good giveaway. So that at night, when I would have to go back to the farm to take the supper out to the field, and say to my dad, if they're getting this much per acre on some barley, what's that? Dad's like, who's running that? Who's getting that? And I'm like, I can't tell you. Somebody's getting that? I'm like, so it was good? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, we're going to the next level.
That's cute.
But, it was building that rapport with the client, because the moment I knew to ask him how it was running, I heard their voice change, because it had nothing to do with travel. It had nothing to do with me. It was, how is their crops running? How are they getting, and I made it about them. And so you build that rapport. So if you're brand new in the industry, you're brand new to building up your customer base, or even if you've been around for a while, make sure you build that connection with your client. My son and he works in restaurants, and we were just chatting last night. There's nothing more annoying than the waitress or this waiter or the waitress, the server coming up to you, not hardly acknowledging you exist all the way through, other than to take your order. And then at the end, when you're paying, they're like, so any big plans for, you don't get to build rapport while you're wanting your tip. You want to build that on the front end so that you build that relationship throughout. so that the relationship's built based on something at the beginning, not at the end. Be like, okay, so that was great. You really enjoyed that. Any big plans? Any friends you can refer me to? No, you want to have that relationship from the start so that your clients feel that they're part of you. That's how you don't have to compete on price. People, there was always the fear of missing out, the FOMO. It's now switched over to FOMO. They have fear of messing up. So when they feel that they've been heard, they've been seen, that they know you're there, they're going to lean into that. And they just don't want to screw something up. So they're okay paying a little bit more if it means they're going to get what it is that they think they're getting. Any final thoughts or tips or tricks you have for new travel advisors?
Let's see. Like, I think when you're choosing a host agency, sometimes, like in terms of one of our specialty areas is helping people start their agency. So we've helped thousands of people through the years. And I would say, like, people get stuck, one, on naming their agency. That's a really tough area. And then the other one is choosing a host agency. And when it comes to choosing a host agency, especially in the beginning, it's easy to get analysis paralysis and get stuck on things. I would say keep pushing forward. Your host that you first choose may not be your forever host, and that is okay. And I wouldn't say it's normal necessarily. Like, it's not like everyone switches host agency, but it's not abnormal to a year or two in, once you have better footing and maybe you've changed positions and decided to focus on something else, and you found that a different consortium model would be better, so you need a different host, whatever it is, like, you can find another host agency. And so not to let that stop you, because like losing momentum is something that's really detrimental to the shaping of your business. It can be very discouraging. And so to keep pushing through, because there's not going to be like the perfect host agency for you. They're all going to have like something that you wish they had. Like, you're like, I wish they had that itinerary builder as, like at a discounted rate, like that other host agency, but they fill 95% of what you're looking for. And that is good enough. And just keep moving forward. If you've done your due diligence, you should be covered from all the big things, and you should be able to work with that host agency. So don't let that stop you. Keep pushing through and choose that host agency.
That's awesome. I love that. I do see a lot of people, they're like, well, this is where I started, so I have to stay here. So I love that you do say, that it's not mandatory that you stay with them.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we almost get this weird loyalty that, well, they helped me in the beginning. Well, yes, but that's also why you paid your monthly fee, or you paid your sign up, or, this, that, the other. So there is a relationship, but there's also a transaction. And it's important to keep in mind, you are the business owner. As an independent consultant, you may not have the one with all the credentials, but you are still the independent owner of your independent agency. So it's taking the emotion out of it sometimes and really going to the actual business side of it. But also too, I would say for those that do change, the one thing I hear from most of them is that they waited too long, because it's sort of like any relationship. If you're dating somebody or even married to somebody and you know that this relationship's over, how many people stay in it 2, 3, 4 years past that? And the one thing they will always say is, I was so much happier once I did this. So if you're starting to have those doubts, I know for myself, when I had my brick and mortar agency, I started having doubts about the company that I was aligned with. And I decided, no. And the moment you start having those doubts, things are going to start to bug you more. And again, I wish I would have pulled the trigger faster and ended my franchise contract with them sooner than what I did, because then again, it's where those emotions come in. So it's making those business decisions. And once you know that you need to go, you really need to actively start looking at other alternatives. So
yeah, and make sure, like, one of the things we tell people to look for in their contracts when they're first starting out is what happens if you choose to leave the host agency going on. Like, some hosts are better at transferring bookings. So if final payment hasn't been made, there's a possibility that that booking can be moved to your new agency. But if final booking has been paid, it has to stay with that host agency. So making sure that if it has to stay with that host agency, even if you're not with them, how do you get paid? Like, will they pay you, or do you have to pay the monthly fee until that commission comes in? What's the rules there? And then if you do leave, will they switch that booking for if it hasn't had final payment, or will they keep it? I can't give specifics on what most host agencies do because it's just across the board what they're doing there. But that's something to be educated about when you're looking for host agencies.
I know I had a lot of people reach out to me during the pandemic. You know, how did you leave? Like, because I wasn't an independent contractor, I had an actual agency. So how did you leave? What did it cost you? You know, because when you leave a franchise contract, you got to do buyouts and things like that. That's a whole different thing. But I had a lot of people ask, and a lot of people were hanging on. And I said, you know what, right now, while your bookings are lower. So again, you got to stay on top of your numbers, know where your bookings are at, know where things are at. And if you're starting to think, maybe I need to look at this, have a look at where you're at with your current outstanding files, and see where the pocket is and see where the gap is and things like that. And it's not always going to be perfect when you switch. And when you go to the next one, remember, you're talking to the salesperson again, you know? So any chance you get to talk to some of their advisors, and even better is when you can talk to advisors that they didn't put you in contact with, you know, because they're always going to give you their glowing stars that are just going to rave about them. So anytime you can do a little bit of research and find some that are listed there that they didn't necessarily give you the names for, you know, pop them a quick email, pop them a quick call, and just say, you know, is there any chance you'd be willing to or able to talk to me about what it's like and things like that? Because that's where you're going to get, it's from the people who are in the same role that you're in, that are independent business owners, that are going to give you that best insight and other such. Keeping in mind, everybody brings their own emotions into the story. But yeah. Now, if they are wanting to know, like, what are the host agencies out there? Again, there's going to be more Americans listed than Canadians. Do you have outside of North America, like outside of Canada, US listed on there?
No, there's only a handful of agencies outside the US. Like, host agencies is a very North American thing.
Okay.
There's just a few in Europe, and they only take from a couple of the different countries. And Australia has a couple as well. But for us, because we'll get inquiries from around the world, and we just don't know, like, learning Canadian rules and regulations for the different provinces is really hard, because your seller of travel, your equivalent for seller of travel, it's very complicated. And so we always let people know, like, we just don't know I don't know what's going on in Australia in their government in relation to travel agencies, and I can't keep up with it. So.
And it constantly changes. That's what I was saying too about the American. So I love the way you distilled it, because I'm pretty up to date on what's going on in Canada, but to find out what's going on in the US, but I have clients from all over. So no, that's great. The one, I just have one final question, and I promise it'll be the last. There is host agencies, and then there are multi-level marketing, or whatever it is that those ones are. How does a travel advisor who's brand new to the industry, how can they spot the difference?
Well, it's interesting that's your question, because I was going to say the one exception to people that will accept people all over the world is the multi-level marketing travel agencies.
Okay.
So Glenda, if it's okay, I don't know if you do show notes or anything, but I'll send you our article on travel MLMs, and I would encourage anyone that is listening to this to read it, because we spent, I don't know, like Mary, who's our editor, spent hours and hours, as did I, like, writing and researching this article. And it was so disheartening to learn. Like, it's not like pyramid schemes have a great, like, warm, fuzzy feeling with them. But after researching and the techniques that's behind it, and actually seeing the amount of money that people lose, and that the target demographic is typically people that can't afford to spend this, and they're getting the promises of riches. Right. So one of the things is on our site, on the directory, is if there is a travel MLM. There's a handful of them out there, but we will put, let me back up a second. So the first one of the first iterations of travel MLMs when I joined the industry was just they were a travel MLM. Now what you're seeing is you'll hear that they'll say, we're not a travel MLM, we're a host agency. Our marketing branch is the MLM.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like two separate companies, but they're run by the same people. Oftentimes you have to join both.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, you don't need to sell to other people though. But it's like, well, then why do I need to join?
Yeah.
So there's all these questions involved with it. And I do want to say a couple things before I go into the differences. One, I'm a big believer, like there are good advisors that are at MLMs, and there are people that just really do genuinely want to become travel advisors. And this is the only way they were introduced to the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's always frustrating when I see travel advisors being incredibly mean to someone just because they're in an MLM.
Right.
Now, it's one thing if they're trying to recruit everybody in the room, that's a little bit awkward.
Yeah.
But if it's someone that just happens to be associated with it, like I always use that as a point of education, and to say like, oh, do you know there's like other options out there? So one of the some of the red flags with travel MLMs is the huge majority of their income comes from membership. It doesn't come from actual travel sales. If you look at, so one of the big travel MLMs in the US right now is IntelliTravel. I think they have like 80 or 90,000 advisors right now, which that number alone should be a red flag for you. I would say the largest agencies in the US have maybe 7,000 at the very most. So 90,000 is ridiculous. But if you divide that, so for the suppliers, they're top accounts, because even if like 10% of the people are selling, that's still a huge amount of sales.
Mm-hmm.
But if you break it down by quote unquote advisor, I mean, it's pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things to look for, is that they are pushing you to do the membership. And like I said, this new iteration of them, the last decade or so, I would say, is that they'll have their marketing branch. And the thing for people to know too, with when you join an MLM, if you decide that for some reason this is a good fit for you, know that while they may be top accounts for suppliers, there is a very bad reputation attached to it. And I hate to say that, but I mean, there really is, because you have all these people that were promised riches and free travel. And oftentimes what happens is you'll sell supplements on the side. Like they're always trying to get you to sell different random things. One of the things is with the, they're having you sell supplements, they're having you sell all these different things. And I don't know, it's just really sad for me to see, because it's like on the article I'll send you, they do something called public disclosure statement, or I can't remember the exact term. It's a 3-letter acronym, but if they're a public company, they can put them out, and it'll say like, we broke it down by the numbers, and it'll be like 80% of people earned something. And then or 80% of people earned nothing, 20% earned something. And then you break that down by that like 20%. And on average, that would mean that someone would make, say, like $350 for the year. But the annual fees for it and everything you pay in is $1,000. So it's a losing proposition. But, of course, they're highlighting the people that are driving these crazy cars that you don't even know what the brand is because they're so fancy. Yeah. But they're the ones that make that like 1%, 0.01% of the pyramid that are raking it in.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. And yeah, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Mm-hmm.
Always reach out to more than one. And then, you know what? Here's the deal. Reach out to more than one. And if you're not sure, send me a message on Instagram. And I will help walk you through it, because I would far rather take a little bit of my time to help you to make sure that you're not going down a path of somebody giving you a whole bunch of whatever. Yeah, I'm here to make the industry better. So if you think you might be talking to somebody who's making things sound amazing, again, fabulous sales teams, send me a message. Art of Selling Travel on Instagram. Send me a DM. We can chat about it. And I can just give you a couple of questions to ask, or I'll link you back up with host agency reviews. I'm gonna pin that into my notes on my phone so that if somebody sends me a message, I'm just gonna DM them your link to that article.
Yeah.
Because
And
I think that's such an important piece for them to have.
It's depressing, but I mean, it's great for education, because even if you run into someone,
Yeah,
you can say like, hey, check this out. But
right.
one of the things too, Glenda, is on the directory, we do label the MLMs. We call them MLM hybrids because they technically call themselves host agencies. But there will be an alert on the top of their profile that lets people know they're an MLM hybrid. And we do link to the article so people can make an educated decision. Because if it's educated and they want to go with an MLM, then go for it. But I just have trouble when people are sold on a lie.
Absolutely. And I can agree with you more too on some people have signed up with them thinking that they did everything right. The reality is, when there's money to be made, people figure out how to use Google keywords. They know how to rank the highest, how to do this, that, the other. And inadvertently, they've ended up someplace they thought they were signing up for something. They were told they were signing up for something, but they're actually doing something else. As a community, please do not shred them. They may not know what they're doing. I totally agree. If they're trying to get everybody else signed up, yeah, no, fair game. But if they're asking questions and things like that, then there's, let's have some kindness. Another big tip I would say is that if you're not able to get answers from your host agency, you've got product questions, you've got supplier questions, and there's nobody there to help you. That's a really big red flag that you might not be in the right host agency as well. There is lots of Facebook groups out there that will help travel advisors. Some of are specialized to location. I know there's one like the Resorts of the Mayan Riviera. There's river cruise ones. There's marketing ones. There's sales. There's all different sorts of ones. So there is places out there, but there should always, always, always be somebody within your host agency that can help direct you. They may not give you the answer. And to be honest, they probably shouldn't give you a direct answer, but they should be able to guide you to where you can find an answer. Because when you find it yourself, I do find simply you're going to remember it better than if somebody just constantly hands it. But if there is no assistance anywhere where they say, check out this or check out that, then it might not be the right option either. So fabulous, Steph. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to link up that article in the show notes and anything else. I think I actually had seen a couple other articles on your website, so I might pop those in there too.
I'll send you the Seller of Travel one too. That'll be helpful.
Perfect. Yeah, that'll help out a lot because I've had a few people reach out to me and they're like, I want to do fees, but I'm not allowed to. And I'm like, how is that working? But now I understand it. So
there's a couple different ways that can happen.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And if you have any other questions, like I said, send me a message on Instagram. That's usually where I'm hanging out the most, Art of Selling Travel. Or Steph, where can people find you if they need more information?
Well, usually in my garden, but other places you can find me is Stephanie at hostagencyreviews.com. Or my social handle on most places is I am Steph Lee with an LY at the end.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And we will catch you guys all on the next episode.